A ghost story, very appropriate for Halloween weekend, right? And an interesting tale. Where was God for you in the midst of that movie?
Oh boy.
I don't know.
God helped me sit still when I thought paint was drying.
Yes. Good.
And looking through the eyes of the perished, I didn't realize that's what I was doing. So God helped me sit there. Had patience.
Sometimes that's what you have to do. I've noticed with some movies, if you watch just the first 15 minutes, you'll turn it off. First half hour or something. And there's something more usually in all those movies, but you have to sometimes sit through it to get to that.
We went back and finished. What was the one that was?
Oh, Just Mercy.
No, that one.
2 weeks ago.
The one didn't finish watching because it.
Blind. Blind.
Yeah, yes. We went back and watched it and realized that definitely by watching all of it.
Yeah.
The whole.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I thought God was in the morgue in that golden door that opened and then disappeared.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good image for us to look at, because it basically says, okay, here's this invitation to go forward. Why right now in my life would I not take that invitation? What would hold me here? What are the things that still capture my heart? What are the things that feel unfinished? What are the reasons I don't walk through there? Because that's essentially what happens, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
For the other ghost, not the one we followed all the time, but the other ghost. Did you see what I'm going to call her? I don't know why it's a her for me, but the other ghost, why is it that she didn't? And ultimately, why is it that she did?
Yeah.
I guess they're not coming back.
Are you talking about the next door neighbor?
The next door neighbor
Yeah.
ghost.
The neighbor goes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that going through the light and having your shroud simply collapse are one and the same thing.
That's a good question, whether they are or not. Interesting. I don't know either, I guess.
I mean, I interpreted that as, if you continue to hold on to material reality, don't recognize the need to pass beyond this material existence. Ultimately, when your material dreams are frustrated or realized, you simply cease to exist. You're estranged forever from the light.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on that. Because at the end, that's essentially what happened to him.
Yeah.
Well, right? And
the
difference at some,
you know what it said.
Yeah, it was something in the note that tied things together, that dissolved the purpose, did something, right?
But it set him free.
Set him free, whatever it happens to be. We don't quite know all of those things, but we know that something kept him stuck. So let me go back to my question. What would keep you stuck? What would be the unfinished in your life that might make it so here you are still? I guess we could call it haunting.
Maybe some sense of purpose that wasn't yet fulfilled.
Yeah. We saw for him, for example, they had, I can't really call it a fight, but because we didn't see the fight itself, but we saw the not quite resolved nature of whatever that conversation was. And we saw it twice, right? And I think at least in part, that's what kept him there.
I didn't realize it watching the movie, but just now listening to you, Jim, I realized the argument, some of the little bits of dialogue where she wanted to move and he didn't want to leave that house.
Yeah, yep, that's exactly right. So there was something about that. And isn't that interesting that the alive man and the dead ghost carried that same didn't want to leave the house?
Mhm.
It almost
Permission
felt
by
to
the
me,
alive person? I don't know. Go ahead, Diane.
it kind of felt to me like that stamp of being in that house and in that place and contained there was in him to begin with. And that was part of what was unfinished.
Yeah.
And when he pulled out the note that she had left in the wall, we talked a lot about that, connecting with the man who did the monologue and talking about a legacy and whether anything was left or not when somebody died. With, would the music be left? Would the art product be left? Would
Yeah, the
any,
single biggest piece of dialogue in the whole movie, right?
Yeah,
Really?
16 minutes.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
it really was. And then for the first time, we talked about maybe this was part of what connected with him, that there was a legacy that he was pulling out of that wall to carry on her in him. And then that connection was made.
And what's interesting though is that like this, was this the house she grew up in?
Yeah.
Because she said she would put it in the houses she grew up in, but he found it in the house that she was there as an adult. So did she leave it as an adult?
Yeah, there was a scene where she's painting and she puts it in there.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
understood her to say, I don't know if I understood correctly. I had the sense she'd lived in many homes as a child.
Yeah.
And that she tucked notes in every one, and she
Every
said,
one.
so that if I ever come back, I'll find something familiar that is me.
That's right.
Yeah.
They'd be there waiting.
Yeah.
Those notes would be.
And then when the ghost goes back and sees the history of the beginning of the house, and the little girl there writes something on a piece of paper and puts it under a rock.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's a good catch.
So what are your messages that carry forward? The easy answer to that is something like your children. They carry something of who you are forward, but what else?
I kind of have the sense that everything we do and say in our lives continues on forever in some way.
And
That may
often,
be wishful thinking.
go ahead.
I said that may be wishful thinking, but there's a lot to suggest that there's some truth to it.
The hard part about that, Greg, is that I'm not certain which of my things get carried forward in positive ways and which one carried forward in other than positive, at least from my perspective, right?
Right.
Because I know I've done some things where somebody reacts negative and they carry that forward from me.
We weren't able to have kids. And so I've always had this sense of myself that I walk kind of lightly on this earth. That's a phrase that has come to me because, as you said, the usual thing people think of is, the generations going on that sprung from you, and we don't have that thing. So it's interesting to think about what legacy there is. And to me, this movie was kind of like in your face, that existential crisis about that very question. Like, do we go on? And it was painful. That guy's dialogue, it kind of takes you to a place of, oh my gosh, what does matter? And, but I think it's something you have to grapple with and kind of even give up your attachment to that, your attachment to having a legacy. I mean, that's a very Buddhist thought, to not be attached to that, and just go on through that door, instead of.
Sharon, where I kind of learned that? As a first grade teacher. And it's not because kids the first grade teachers don't do a whole lot, but then comes the second grade teacher, the third grade teacher, and the fourth grade teacher, and the fifth grade teacher. And sometimes you, as the first grade teacher, you get lost in all those other teachers. And that's not a bad thing, because in reality, what you give allows all that other to happen. But that's true in all of our relationships. Think about even those that you have the most influence on, right? You don't get to have all the influence on that person. And many times we need to be eclipsed by the rest. And so you are having influence on people. You just sometimes don't get to, they don't come back and say, oh, you were my teacher, right? It's because sometimes they don't even realize it.
Isn't the essence of Christianity that we are fundamentally eternal and spiritual as individuals? We have a unique soul which transcends this material universe and the span of time that we call life, and that really our ultimate destination is not a material realm at all, but an eternal and spiritual realm. And that, you know, that essentially the ghost was fighting against his very nature and essence by refusing to move on. I think that C.S. Lewis, I think, once observed that as surely as we are reluctant to pass from life through the portal of death, he said, you know, babies are perfectly comfortable in the womb, but to move along their appropriate and destined course, they have to undergo, you know, this ordeal and pass through and pass into a larger reality.
Yeah. And it's hard for us in any way, anytime we make a transition like that. It can even just be from single to married, right? From not a parent to being a parent, from having a job to being retired. All of those make us have to make that type of shift. Can I be that new person? Can I move towards that new realm? What do I lose in the midst of it? As well as what do I gain? It's hard for us in this life to not define ourselves through this body, then the spirit that inhabits it. So when I look towards next life, whatever existence is post this, I don't even know how to formulate that without carrying the essence of what I think I am here. But what if that's not the definition at all there?
Well, I'm afraid here's where my Taoist heart comes out. That door is not to God, it's to nothingness.
And it might be, or it might be to something that is completely different. I once saw this description that was very apt, I think, for me. If I picture myself as myself, and I equate that to a drop of water that drops back into the sea, have I lost myself in the ocean, or have I found my larger self?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the mystics believe that very much.
Yeah, and because I can only define me by this, or at least that's the easiest way I define me, that doesn't feel like me, but does that make it not me?
When we look back at who we have been in our lives, we think, well, that was me. But on the other hand, those past persons are so different from who we are today.
Yeah. And very different to whoever was looking at you as well.
Mm.
Whoever you defined yourself as in that moment is not necessarily who the other person you interacted with saw.
Which is a good reminder not to ever say, oh, I know that person. I know what they're about.
Mm. Yeah. And both looking at the other person and looking at yourself in that moment too. Because we really aren't only defined by our self-image. We're also defined by everyone else's perspective of us.
You know, I'm really intrigued right now. You know, Buddhism has really helped me a lot. And there's that whole concept they have about that we're really emptiness, that we're not,
Right.
you know, which is so hard for me to wrap my mind around coming out of Judeo-Christianity, where
Yeah, very American of you as well.
yeah, and just very Western. That but that concept that you talked about, Randy, earlier about the you know, that you have this image of your soul kind of continuing on, and then Taoism is it goes to nothingness, and then Buddhism is kind of like the oneness of everything, I think. Anyway, I'm trying to grapple with this, and I mean, basically at the end, you just say it's a mystery.
Yeah.
Live the mystery, you know.
I think it was Plato, I'm not sure, one of the Greeks who believed that while we took an individual and unique essence from a spiritual realm for our time here on earth, at our death, that spiritual essence returned to the pool, the larger pool, the ocean of spiritual essence that from which it was once drawn, and sort of went back into the larger collectivity.
Yeah.
But
Well, and St. John of the Cross and Santa Teresa Avila said, people believe that you've lost yourself when you join the oneness, which you cannot describe, and it has no name, and it's not he and she and so on and so forth. But they say, no, you have gained yourself, but there is no self. The great mystery, they are mystics.
Yeah.
And that's where you accept it. And of course, they said there's a sweetness in that, even with great pain.
John, we have a little too much of needing to be the one who accomplished to easily grasp that. The one who defined, the one who did the work. And that all of that kind of goes against that which we teach ourselves easily in America, right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
But one of the most intriguing scenes for me of the movie was the first time as he's moving through his life and he's scratching and he gets the paper loose just as the backhoe comes through the front window.
Yeah.
Right? He's about to discover the essence of life, right? Or whatever it is, that which he thinks will define things. And all of a sudden, the wall literally crashes down. And he's left standing there on the pile of rubble.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've kind of felt like that sometimes in life.
Yeah. Well, that's Taoist again, too.
Yeah.
You don't know. When Diane and I were traveling in China and Taiwan, we went to a Taoist temple. That was in Taiwan. Yes, it was. And you know, you pray in any direction when you go in that tent.
Yeah.
You lift the rock or the wooden forms. One's kind of like a moon and one's round. It's very simple. And you turn any direction for your prayer and you toss the forms anywhere because it's all random. Everything is random.
Yeah. And yet there's a lot of directionality oftentimes with religion. I'm always reminded as I drive up Sunrise and Skyline and make that turn onto Ina as I go by the Mormon temple. On top of Mormon temple, there's always an angel Moroni.
Moroni.
Okay. Do you notice which way he's facing?
Mm-mm.
He's facing. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Remember?
Well, it's well, again, we've been told it's random, but it should be north.
Yeah. No, it's not.
I think
And
it's
it's not.
west. Isn't he trumpeting the end of existence?
It's trumpeting to the mountains. Okay. Not to the valley, not to the most of the people. Right. And
Oh, I see.
it always intrigues me why they have him situated the way he is situated on that temple.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
So it's kind of northwest that he's facing
Yeah.
instead of south or south. Oh no, northeast that he's facing. Sorry, instead of southwest even that I would think it would be facing. But that's because directionality means a lot, because that's how we give a lot of definition to our life, to our existence. Right? Where do we receive things from? How do we send things out? Those are all directional type of questions. And what if it is very random? You know, like I teach a first grader, but maybe it's not my teaching that goes forward directly, but because that kid somehow just says something that I said to some other kid, and he's the one who carries it forward and becomes something because of it. Not because of me, but because of some relatively random connection.
Yeah.
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 A movie that explored that a lot was the movie Crash, if you remember that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a marvelous film about all kinds of people that sometimes some of them at first seemed good and some of them bad. And it switched as they went along through a series of just small little interactions, or not always just small, sometimes big interactions, but crashes of life.
Mhm. Yeah.
that have results that they can't quite predict. And that's a little hard for us who love to be in control,
Yeah.
but
We
are
thought-
used to having some influence.
We thought that was a really very, very important movie. I know it got panned and people didn't like it and so forth, but you're really right. That another thing too, coming from Hinduism, is the bardo, which is a state where you do not know that you're dead yet and don't want to depart. I'm not sure that this movie quite depicts that, but movies like Jacob's Ladder definitely explores bardo.
Yeah.
He doesn't
But I-
know.
John, did you read Lincoln in the Bardo?
Yeah,
Yeah.
No, it was,
Yeah.
it was something.
there are many movies that are really like that. Even remember Poltergeist?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that corridor where the so-called spirit or energy is, that's such a walking thing, walking, so to speak. It's a bardo myth. I think that applies in this movie a great deal. He knows and he doesn't know. He's in that world. That place. It isn't the world.
Yeah.
Because there's no time either. He can be forward and he can be backward in time.
That's right.
Time doesn't matter. But he's on the verge of an eternity that is nothing.
Well, but essentially what he's saying as he looks at the lighted passageway, he said, well, that's not me yet. I'm not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm dead.
Mhm.
Yeah, those passages are fascinating images.
Yeah.
And they're always very dark at the ends of them.
I think the dark at the end is always have no clue what's down that way. I think it's our unknowing that makes the end dark.
That moment when he first pulls the paper out and then the bulldozer crashes through the wall of the house was a turning point, because then he went into the future and then he went into the past and then he went back to his life with his wife in the house and even saw himself as a ghost. He was watching him, and then ultimately liberation, I guess. But
Yeah.
it was tragic at first, but in retrospect, it was a significant turning point.
Yeah.
So that was the scene where there were the two ghosts. He was
Ghosts.
watching himself. I didn't get that. Interesting.
And the
What
crash.
I thought was important about that, that's where he escaped his life, his house, but the space was there now defined by the skyscraper and earlier by whatever the pioneers were going to make that they didn't quite make because they were killed. Okay, it was the beginning of a thought of a place of existence. So it's kind of saying the you, not you, right? if you are this house, but you're gone, or you're not built yet, but somehow this place extends both directions, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And that would reflect the in-between experience that he was having.
Yeah, yeah,
In between the initial building of it and the skyscraper that was going to replace it
yeah.
in his life, in his death, in his bardo.
Yeah, I saw it as a micro expression of the same sense of material recurrence that was covered in the lengthy soliloquy by the half-drunk bald guy.
Yeah, yeah,
That, all the universe starts out as this tiny speck, more massive than human mind can contemplate, the Big Bang, expanding universe, entropy, collapsing universe, then what? It's all just constantly recycling.
yeah.
And I think that explains the two ghosts in that last scene. It was, if he'd stuck around some more, the room would have been full of ghosts,
Yeah.
all him.
Yeah.
But I think the message is that we're such limited creatures, we can't even hope to understand the material reality we currently inhabit. And consequently, our efforts at understanding some reality that transcends this one are going to be necessarily bound by our limitations and sort of a foolish effort. That's why when, an agnostic friend of mine, takes me to task for my faith and accuses it of being based on a sort of a simplistic story, I said, I believe that God acted in a fashion that was comprehensible to us limited human beings, that we can't even begin to understand what the larger reality is, but at least we can kind of get this through a glass darkly sort of vision of what eternity and eschatology and all that other stuff will bring.
I think the soliloquy was really important, but so I want to talk about that soliloquy and all the questions that he asks and the really the identity type of questions he's asking. But I think it's interesting that it was preceded by seeing the ghost in the next house over, where that ghost, this was their exchange. Let me just read it. Let me read exactly what their exchange was. Who's there? It's me. Never mind.
Right.
Right? Here I am proclaiming, here I am, me. It's me. Never mind.
Never mind. Yeah.
And then it goes into that soliloquy, and it's essentially, he's essentially reaffirming that never mind.
Yeah.
But in a very strange way, because the symphony, the Beethoven's Ninth, while Beethoven ceases to get to own it, carries on somehow. Somebody, he says, remembers just a hint of a tune, but it's no longer mine. And is it okay for it to not be Jim's? Is it okay just to let it be that which carries on? Or do I have to have ownership?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's at least part of what the soliloquy was about, right?
Yeah.
Do we own that future accomplishment? Do we get to be remembered?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how many are trying to, or have tried to, do something that will change the world around you? Right? That's a good thing. But there's a really good chance that 100 years from now, your name will not be attached to whatever the legacy is of that. And is that okay?
Yeah.
The notion of merit is a difficult notion because I think there's maybe a biblical passage that says, what do we have that wasn't given to us?
Mm-hmm.
So we who produce anything can only produce it because we received something from somewhere or someone. So to take credit is kind of an illusory.
Much of the book of Ecclesiastes is about that type of thought.
Yeah.
What is it that we don't get to hold on to? Vanity, vanity, all is vanity.
Vanity. Yeah.
Right?
Which can be negative, which is how I experienced it as a young person.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be positive.
Yeah.
Just let it go and relax, you know.
How well do you let go?
It can be hard.
What makes it hard for you to let go? What are some of the things that you want to hold on to, either to fix them or to remember that you did fix them or whatever else? You know, one of the hard parts about kids is trying to let them be adults and do things that you wouldn't let them do, right? That you wouldn't want them to do and be.
Or just letting them be who they are. I've always thought that must be the most, not being a parent, but I just think, you know, to let your kids be who they are would just be the biggest challenge for me, because I'm so image conscious, and I know I'd be a helicopter mom. I mean, I'm a helicopter
Yeah.
mom for a dog, so.
I think one of the hard things for me is I want to think that I've made a difference in this world, in my life. I want to think that, I want to believe it, but it's so hard to find tangible instances of that. But one thing that I remember is I won't always know the good that I've done. And I think of my mom died when I was in my 30s, which I thought was really unfair. And I was out of work for a while. And a young man that I had trained, I was doing computer work. I had trained him how to use this piece of software. And we'd only met 3 or 4 times. He was 19. He was a refugee from Africa. And he wrote me a note that said, "I'm really sorry to hear about your mom." And it was just so unexpected that somebody that I barely knew, who was a young man from another country, would write something like that to me. And so I realized that perhaps I've done some things like that in my life that have really unexpectedly helped someone.
Yeah.
And I think that's the impetus behind me writing notes to people that I barely know when they lose somebody in their life, because I know how much that note meant to me.
But sometimes it takes that.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not saying somebody who hasn't lost someone dear to them can't care about someone who today does lose someone. But sometimes when someone is there in a way for you, it helps you to be there in a way for others. That empathy.
Is Sandy trying to get on? I keep seeing Earl flash up.
No, it's Earl's feet are here.
What are you, in bed?
Yeah.
No, he's in his easy chair.
There you go.
Thank you for noticing.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for noticing Earl's feet. Is that right?
Some people will do anything for attention.
Yeah.
He's quiet, but he's a rascal.
Yeah.
Well, but he's your rascal.
You bet.
Come on, own up.
So there's a couple places that really intrigued me, and I want to just ask your view of things. First of all, kind of simply, as he first died, and he's standing there in the empty house because she's just gone away, right? and the house is a black and white house, and all of a sudden it turns to color, right? As he turns, because the kids run through the hallway, and he sees the new family there.
Yeah.
And the whole time they speak nothing but Spanish, almost as if to underscore the difference of this new world where he finds himself, right? You can't even understand the language that's spoken because it's so different from.
Well, what was there before is completely obliterated, is what that symbolizes, with joy and with a positive thing.
That family was wonderfully happy, right? The mom and the 2 kids, and yet all she felt was anger, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, I think he thought they invaded his space because he was still on his journey to get that piece of paper out of the wall, and that was his job to do at that point, and so nothing should interfere with it, not even the happiness of children.
That was intriguing to me, that whole first thing.
Yeah.
Where is it that I'm that same way, somehow tossed into a new world?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the good news is, as a pastor, itinerant pastor that moves from church to church, I sometimes feel that way.
Yeah. Plus, you speak Spanish.
Well, yeah, but and so there's always things that help us to be able to negotiate it. But sometimes when you get into that new world, you realize that you don't speak all the language of this.
Oh, right.
You're in now.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, we're not in Kansas type of thing. And it takes some time. So think about when it was that you flew to Oz. You know, when it is that all of a sudden the rules changed and you didn't change with them yet. What'd you do? What helped you? Or did you just react like the ghost and you were angry?
Well, one of the things that was astonishing to me was we lived in Salt Lake City for 8 years and we were non-Mormons, so there was a sense of not belonging to the community. I could hardly wait till we moved to Tucson, and all the dreams that I had for what we would be able to do and connections with people would be fulfilled. And that was not happening. And I was feeling some loss of friendships back in Salt Lake. And I went to the grocery store, and the meat was not of the quality that I was expecting that had been in Salt Lake. And I stood in front of the meat counter and I cried.
Yeah, because of one simple little
It wasn't the same kind of meat. The realization was that I had attributed so many things to this move that were not even realistic, that I was not looking at the ideal that I had created in my mind that could not be fulfilled. And it was symbolized by the inferior meat.
Wow.
But that sense of journey from here to there, moving from what I did know to whatever this new thing is, that infuses all religions. You know, the sense of a spiritual path is a pretty typical motif in the spiritual world, and it often becomes, how do you acclimatize to the new world? And sometimes we're busy looking for the meat from the old world, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Right at the beginning of the journey, one of the first things that happened after he came back to the house, after the pie and everything, he comes back with the new man. Obviously had gone on a date.
Yeah.
And the first time he manifests himself by the electricity pulsing and the books fall. Remember that?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
You remember what the book says? Because it's real important. Focused way in and just showed the writing on the page, and then came even closer. And there were 2 lines in that book. Remember what they said? The line above said, safe, safe, safe. And the line below said, the treasure's yours.
Yours.
And that's from Virginia Woolf's A Haunted House,
A haunted house.
which is, a line is quoted from that at the very beginning. I
Yes.
had just reread that short story. So when I saw it, oh my gosh, he really is connecting this. And in that story, there's a couple ghost that moves through the house
Yeah.
and is looking at the couple that lives there while they're sleeping.
Uh-huh.
And the couple ghost is looking for where their treasure was in that house.
Mm.
And finally, the person who's viewing this, who's one of the living people, realizes that the treasure is in their hearts.
Yeah.
That's where it is.
But when you're on a journey, when you're in the unknown elements of life that aren't like what you're used to, it's hard to remember that you have the treasure already. Especially if you're really in search of it, right? Trying to find whatever it is you're missing. It's hard to remember that. But safe, safe, safe. The treasure's yours. But it took the whole journey, you know, all the way forward and then all the way back for the ghost to realize that. To get some kind of resolution. And like Randy said, we're not exactly sure what the resolution was. You know what happens when the shroud drops?
Well, he accepted his nothing, but he'd gone to nothingness. Sorry, I have to insert that again.
Yeah, we just don't even know. But isn't that the truth about all of our existence? What happened to Grandpa that I lost?
Well,
Right?
yeah. He's here and here.
Yeah, the treasure's yours, at least
Yours.
to some degree.
And that's
But
true.
as that speaker, the guy who was drinking and talking said, he's here and here, this generation, maybe a little bit the next generation,
Yeah.
maybe by the third generation, not so much. So
Yeah.
Gets lost, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, you know, I think because we're all energy, we just shift to another form of energy. And this
Yeah.
is what I believe. It just made sense to me that he found his answer, something that she wrote and probably forgot about. And then he was able to move on in a different way.
So what would give you a reassurance on a note that would allow you to just continue journeying and slip away from whatever it is you were holding on to?
Well,
And
when
that's-
our son was killed, I couldn't handle the news, so I went to another room, and he came to me and he said, "Mom, I am fine. You're gonna be fine. It happened, and it's okay." And I went back to Earl and I said, "It's gonna be okay." And he couldn't believe me. And I said, "I know, because Carl came back to me. And I've had that visit when I needed it many times. So for me, that's proof."
And it doesn't matter that Earl doesn't get it because we're all used to Earl not getting it. Sorry, Earl. You know, the hard part is what gives assurance to you may not give assurance to the other person, right? May not be an answer in whatever way. How about for the rest of you? What are some of the things that have helped you?
Well, I can't help but look. I mean, I'm not sure that our ghost found reassurance in the note
Thank you.
at all.
I agree.
The only other ghost that met that same fate, the collapse of the shroud, her last line was, "I guess they're not coming." You know,
Right.
she had finally accepted that her existence in the material world was at that point and forward immaterial. And it was certainly not a happy note, you know. I was thinking he might have read on the note, you know, this man and I lived here, but I've moved on, and I see, I see the ultimate message of the film for those who cling to material reality to be, dark, that
And I think something that reinforces that, Randy, because I don't disagree with you, is that as he pulls the note out, something else happens in that moment. Do you remember?
Door opens.
The door opens.
Right.
And it's almost as if he has a choice to go out the door or to look
Read.
at the note. And he
Read.
chooses the note.
Yeah. Yep.
And are you right that that's a unfulfilling thing because you get the answer you wanted? Or do you step into the unknownness of stepping outside of your house? Which, of course, as a living person, he didn't want to do, or as a ghost.
When you ask about reassurance, that's such an interesting topic for me, because coming out of fundamentalist Christianity, where everything was so certain, you knew exactly where what was going to happen. I mean,
Not all the right answers.
an answer for, yeah, and it's like that is so soothing to me, to the way I am, that leaving that, I had to leave that because I just couldn't sit with those kind of values anymore. But the grief that I went through leaving behind that certainty was what to me was depicted in this movie. It's like face to face with angst. But more and more, I think that looking to some kind of reassurance is never going to be satisfying. There's a part of us inside that knows like, well, maybe, but there's a part of us that knows that the real work is kind of like Thich Nhat Hanh talks about in Fear. It's like sitting with our angst, sitting with the mystery, as I say, the unknown, it's like that really becomes kind of a reassurance. It's like you have to grow up and you have to just be, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like that path is, to me, yeah.
It makes perfect sense to me because Mormonism has all the right answers too. I knew all the right answers by the time I was 12. And I mean that literally. But that left me unfulfilled. Because sometimes having the right answer stops you from searching for the deeper mystery of life.
Or it makes you turn on other human beings because you have to defend that truth. And
yeah. And it took me another 12 years of my life before I got to that place, Sharon, to where I had to leave. 12 years of probably where some people felt attacked by my truth.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we grow up into that? How do we allow ourselves to step into the unknown instead of staying within our house that we know, even though it's going to crumble down around us? Because we already saw it do that once, right?
I'm having an experience of feeling so strongly averse to conservatism, Donald Trump, republicanism, and yet at the same time feeling really unsettled at how divisive and angry I feel, and just kind of intuiting that something's not right about that. It feels so right to be angry, and yet at the same time, it doesn't feel right. And I don't really know where to go from where I am,
I don't disagree with you, Greg, because bottom line is, I feel the same way. I am a person of love. I know that is what drives me the most. I know that is my highest value, and I don't want to love some people right now.
Yeah.
I just don't want it. And you're right, it tears my heart apart.
And of course, the easy way, I agree completely with both of you, but and the easy way for me at times is to say, well, that's not really me. It's Donald Trump made me that way. And
Yeah.
that's a big lie that I'm telling
That's a big
myself.
lie.
Because
I
if
believe
I can have those feelings, they're mine, and I need to take ownership of it.
Yeah.
And there are times when I don't feel apologetic for it, but it's my decision to have those feelings, not somebody else imposing on me.
I don't think there's any necessary contradiction between the terms righteous and anger. I think the anger that people of goodwill feel when they are exposed to the darker parts of human reality is not only appropriate, but it's a necessary catalyst to affecting the change. You know,
Right.
Christ felt anger. You know, he sure drove those money changers out. You know, it's a curious incident, but there it is. I mean, I couldn't help but feel that this ghost story reminded me of another ghost story. The season's coming up for it, A Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
And our ghost is kind of like Marley's ghost, condemned after death to walk among humanity, you know, seeing the positive interactions that he had failed to foster in his lifetime, sending himself forth. I think our job here is light and love. And, you know, that is how we prepare ourselves for the eternity that we can only imagine as light and love. You know, it's like the incarnation of Christ.
Yeah,
you know?
but that's really hard, Randy. Right
Yeah.
after the books fell and the ghost saw the lines, safe, 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 the treasure's yours, they go into the flashback of the end of the argument, right? And he says, this shouldn't be so hard. Or she says that, and he says, I really don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And then he puts his headphones on her head. Did you listen to the song?
Mhm.
The chorus said these words: is my love there? Is my lover there? Are we breaking up? Did she find someone else and leave me alone? And in many ways, I think that was his unanswered. Those were his unanswered questions. And unanswered questions always leave us in that nebulous space of ghosting. Because John, as much as you feel comfortable with non-existence, I'm not certain I'm quite there yet.
Mhm.
Right? I want my questions answered. I want my love to be felt. I want to know the love of others that's assured. And life doesn't always give us that, does it?
Well, think of it this way. That then leaves you concentrating on here and now.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that other.
Yeah.
Like Doris is saying, like Sharon has said, here we are now, and I can do things on this plane and, forget about owning, my great works or any of that kind of thing. Just love Diane and the kids and grandkids and let them love too.
Sometimes it seems to me that we're seeking something that exists that we aren't not cognizant of, that we are not identifying or recognizing. And I have had some of that experience in the more recent past with that, of yearning for things that didn't happen and mourning what I didn't experience. And then I realized, but wait a minute, it really is, I'm only focusing on one piece and one part. And do I continue to focus on that, replay that piece of my life or that part of the story, and not recognize what's before me and what's been with me all along, in terms of other people who have stayed the course, or other people that have shown up along the way. So I feel like it is exactly like you were saying, John, it is about here and now, and what I can do differently, and how I can recognize what is, and how I can be in this moment, not what I ever was or what I might be tomorrow or next year, but right now, today, what's really the most important thing about Wednesday, the 28th of October.
I think it was interesting that as the ghost went into the future, did you notice that his shroud became increasingly dirty?
Yes, yes.
Right? Until
It
he
was
stood on the
soiled,
side of the building and jumped, and he was filthy at that point. And I wonder if our drive towards making a future does that to us.
Yeah. That's an interesting thought. Yeah.
As that was happening, I kept thinking back to one of my very first influences, and it was a book by Virginia Lee Burton called The Little House, a children's book. Have you ever heard of it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I
The
remember.
house sits on a hill, and it's a beautiful hill, and she watches the sun come up at dawn and go down at the evening, and then it goes through the seasons as things change, and then the city increasingly approaches. First a road comes through,
Oh, yeah.
houses come through, and then tenement houses, and then and suddenly this little house is in the middle of all these skyscrapers, until the great granddaughter of the man who built her comes and says, I think that's my great grandfather's house. Yeah. And comes and picks it up and carries it out to the country again. So it finds its right space.
Oh yeah, I remember that, how that's illustrated and everything. We read that a lot to our.
Yeah, it's an amazing book, just an existential book in a very real way.
Yes.
That formulated myself as a kid and myself as a teacher in a very real way. And I think that this story in some ways was trying to tell the same thing. What is your right space of existence? Not all those other things that we have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kind of on a tangent, but I just have to go back to the shroud thing again and just talk about the artistic nature of this movie. I mean, this could have been very hokey if that costume had just been, it was so shroud-like, and the way it floated and the way the eyes were done, sort of this questioning expression somehow with just those black holes. Yeah. The music, it was like so evocative.
I love the music.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
it's superb.
Yeah, so artistic.
Well, and did you notice too that the frame of the film was square, not rectangular?
Oh, the lighting, totally this sort of dusky. Yeah.
Twilight.
Well, and then everything that you see, it very much like, the Flemish painter Vermeer, the clarity, like it's painted, absolutely beautiful. The shroud falls, and the softness of the material falls like the softness on the material of, the Virgin or whomever, and that absolute clarity toward the background, and it's all within a square frame, not rectangle, which gives you a breadth of the world. This is this world, very contained and very beautiful and sad.
The challenge about a movie like this is it doesn't quite give us the answers, does it?
Mm-mm.
Right, I'm glad.
That it gives some amazing visions of. And ask some really good questions of us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let me grab next week's movie. I forgot to bring it over here. That's not it.
Well, thank you all for a great discussion.
Yeah, you guys
Yeah.
all saw so many things that I sure didn't. That was great.
Well, everybody.
Yeah.
So next week, oh brother, where art thou?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen this movie, then you've missed out on one of my very favorites ever.
Yeah.
So enjoy watching Delmer and the boys, and we'll get together in a week.
They're outstanding.
Thank
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, my friends.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Jim.